So that's a great question. Reproductive justice means many things. First of all, it's a framework, and it was a framework that was given to us by African American women in the American South. And it's important to acknowledge that lineage of reproductive justice because it emerged from a context, a time when African American women's rights and their human dignity was being disavowed and abused in ways in which their bodies, their connection to land, their connection to each other was severed, and they couldn't raise their families in the ways that they wanted and needed.
Reproductive justice is everything. It's the work that I do. It's centered in me being a Black woman and just knowing the inequity that exists for not just Black women, but marginalized women, vulnerable women, femmes, trans people, members of the LGBTQ plus community. So, really, all that I do and all that I am is reproductive justice. When we think about disparities, as a midwife, when I think about what happens to birthing people and pregnant people and their babies, it's a movement. It's a framework for how we think about our bodies, the rights we have in regards to them. Those rights being full spectrum and being able to determine what we do with it, whether we birth or not, whether we choose not to, and just how we live and thrive. So, reproductive justice is everything.
Okay, so for me, I grew up in the East Coast, and I had the privilege of being able to go to like an all-women's college. So there are a lot of things I learned there about being a woman, but that way of being a woman was like really patterned off after white womanhood. And I think one of the things that I thought was that I needed to approximate that, right? But approximating is not being. Getting close to power is not being fully in your power. And so I came to my rite of passage kind of fairly late in my life, and I got my batik or my tattoos when I had just completed my first year of midwifery training. And someone said, "Did you feel powerful then when you got your batik?" And I was like, "No, it just unleashed my power that I felt was always inside." And so I wished that at that time in my 20s, that my desires and my ways of being could be seen. But I realized I wasn't in the right place to have that seen. And I feel like Hawaii has been part of my like second coming of age. And especially now as I turn 50 in a couple of days, I think about all the ways that this place in particular has seen me, deeply seen me, and how being like in the ocean and being in the world and making kin with everything outside has made me who I am. And so I wish I had had more language for that when I was younger and more permission for that.
I wish that the women in my family, the women in my life talked to me about girlhood and the transition from that into womanhood. I think oftentimes adults don't teach young girls and women and just young people about their experiences, their lived experiences in ways in which they can help us navigate. I just wish someone helped me navigate becoming a woman better. It was just shrouded in so much secrecy, sometimes shame, guilt. Um, I just wish I knew that all the things I was feeling and experiencing were valid, that there was nothing to be shameful about in my growing, in my curiosity, in my questioning. So I wish there was someone, anyone who could have showed up for me in those ways and just sat me down and just, what I like to say, taught me game. Just taught me like, this is life. These are the things you're going to encounter. These are the experiences you may or may not have. These are the experiences I had, and these are the lessons I would love to impart to someone else.
Oh boy. There's lots. That's a really great question. And I feel like, oh gosh, we'd have to be here for a while. But when I think about reproductive oppression in the context of the workplace and in the context of being able to fully bring everything that I am and everything that I'm about. I think a lot about the subtle indignities of microaggressions, of not being able to be fully all I am, or maybe subtly being judged or shamed about it. Um, and particularly the ways that I have chosen to make family in my life, or the ways that I have chosen not to make family in my life. I feel like that has placed myself on a certain hierarchy, right? Um, where that is not okay. Like how I make family, or who's expanded in my circle sometimes is viewed as not okay. That I should, have all my attention going to my partner, a husband, a man, or children. Um, and I feel like full reproductive justice allows us to be fully everything we are and have the things that we need.
I pause, when that question is asked, because as a midwife and someone who is with people as they're going on this rite of passage and journey of not becoming, one anymore, becoming two, and really giving life. All the disparities in equity that I've seen as people are going through that journey from their care providers, particularly in hospitals, seeing the difference between how Black birthing people are treated versus white, birthing people, where the circumstances can be the same. They can be parallel, but just due to racism, not race, that the Black the birthing person of color, is just encountered with all kinds of fights and battles that shouldn't be there, where people aren't, able to be their full selves when they're in their most vulnerable place sometimes. Giving birth is, a transformation. It is a time when we are going through a process that is ultimately, something that someone is doing alone, even though they have support. And to have care providers around you who are not only, making that, transition difficult, but adding, their bias, adding their stereotypes to that, and causing harm, not just, adding those things, but really harming people, especially as we look at, what happens to Black mothers and babies if they die at 3 to 4 times the rate of their white peers. It's astounding, and it's something that, we have to, just be upfront about and say that it's due to racism, and what do we do about it?
Yeah. Okay, so I've been thinking about this one, and I've been thinking about like all the ways that things have shifted and changed, where more of our identities can be seen now. And so I feel like it's like, what advice do y'all have for us? It might almost be the better question. I'd read somewhere where like if you're like 50 and over and you don't have like a mentor who's like in their like teens or 20s, like you're missing the boat. But I feel like one of the things I would say is that in our desire to belong, whether within identity that feels like us, like sometimes identities are crafted in opposition to something that has been painfully exclusionary of us, right? So we create these spaces where we can thrive and be. But sometimes those spaces where we can thrive and be start wanting things from us that also are not really genuinely authentic. And so the advice I would give, and then first of all, of course, to myself, is to strive to be authentically everything you are. And that the only way that one begins to really know that is being and maintaining a an unconditional friendliness with oneself and one's breath, and making time to really know that. Because sometimes the conditioning to belong is very intense, and the conditioning to want to be part of a collective, part of a group is very intense. And it can sometimes feel literally painful when we're like, that part of me doesn't fit. But sometimes when we can extend that unconditional friendliness to ourselves, then those questions of belonging kind of start to slip away, if that makes sense, because the belonging is in the body. And it kind of goes back to these RJ concepts of land back and bodies back.
Advice that I would give younger girls is to ask questions, to know, regardless of whether someone tells you or not, that you are beautiful and you are okay, that you have the right to be completely autonomous in your thinking and being and the way you move in the world. I think oftentimes, girls and femmes and young people, they grow up in this space to where they're unsure and insecure and looking for validation outside of themselves. So just to be like, whatever you're feeling or whatever, you are is okay, and to move through the world in that way.
So the pose that I'm going to do in just a second is a pose that in my writers group we did on Zoom, and the writers group started, right around the time that COVID, lockdown started, and when we knew we couldn't give hugs anymore, so we would do this like thing where we would just everyone say hugs, and they would do like this self embrace. And it was this like beautiful like acknowledgement of like, yes, we don't have each other, but we have each other virtually, and we're holding ourselves, right, but we're holding each other together. And so that is my pose that makes me feel safe and loved, and just this holding action, just makes me feel held well. It's that unconditional friendliness to self that I was telling you about, right? And that the self is never alone, but always with others too.
A pose. I don't know if it's necessarily a pose, but for me, physical touch is a way that I feel love. So anytime anyone is doing anything that is an embrace, that is, something where someone is literally holding me and holding space, is something that makes me feel loved and makes others feel loved in the process.